Okay, here we go. All right, hello. Thank you very much for taking time to talk to Bridges Detroit. I wonder if you could introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
Yes, I'm Jeff Morinoff. I'm a professor in the Department of Sociology and the School of Public Policy and the Institute for Social Research at University of Michigan. And I'm one of the co-leads of this project that we'll be describing, the Detroit Metro Area Communities Study.
And I'm Lydia Wilden. I'm a PhD student at the University of Michigan in the Sociology and Public Policy program, and I'm a research analyst with the DMAX project.
Thanks, Lydia. So we thought we would just start off by giving you a brief overview of the project, and Lydia is then going to walk through some of the latest results, which are hot off the presses since we just closed the survey a few days ago. So the Detroit Metro Area Community Study, or as we like to call it, DMAX, has been around since 2016 is when we launched it, but it really has changed substantially during the pandemic. Originally, the idea was to do 2, maybe 3 surveys a year on the impact of investments and policies that affect communities in and around Detroit, and to get feedback from citizens of Detroit on priorities for investments, and to try to provide feedback to people to organizations and policymakers who are making those investments and shaping those policies about the public opinion of citizens. And we continue to do that kind of work, but when the pandemic hit, we decided to focus on the economic and social impacts and health impacts of the pandemic on Detroiters. One thing that changed was that we could no longer use our same methods of recruiting new people into the sample. We pride ourselves on having a very representative sample, a random selection of adults in Detroit. We could no longer go door to door asking people to take the survey like we used to do. So instead, we have been talking to people who have filled out surveys for DMAX in the past, and that's about 1,800 people. And it's a representative slice of Detroiters. We've had amazing responses from people during the pandemic. The response rates to our surveys have been well over 60%, and in most cases over 65% of the 1,800 people that we've contacted, the 1,800 plus people that we've contacted. So we've had data on about 1,100 people in Detroit. One of the things that we realized early on in the pandemic is that we have some of the best data on the employment situation in Detroit, and that our sample sizes are actually larger than surveys that the Bureau of Labor Statistics does in Detroit. So among other things, we've been reporting on the unemployment rate and the amount of people in the labor force in Detroit, and a lot of questions about the economic impacts and the unevenness of those impacts across different race, ethnic groups, and people of different income levels. And so I'm going to turn it over to our superstar student, Lydia, who has been crunching the latest numbers and can bring us up to date on what we're finding. So Lydia, take it away.
Yeah, so as Jeff said, we've been tracking the impact of COVID from March until basically last week, and really focusing a lot of our results on the extreme level of financial precarity that we're seeing within Detroit, both among Detroiters at large, and then also among those who have lost their jobs. And as Jeff said, we've been following the unemployment rate in Detroit. We saw it spike at around 48% of those working Detroiters who are unemployed, not able to find jobs or to keep their jobs. That was in our May-June survey, so our survey that ended at the end of May, beginning of June. We have found that since that survey, around 38% of Detroiters remain unemployed, so we do see quite a drop between our last survey and our current survey in terms of the unemployment rate, which we think is maybe a positive sign. It suggests that some Detroiters are able to go back to work. But accompanying that drop in the unemployment rate, we haven't seen a level of greater financial stability in our most recent results. So with that unemployment rate, one of the things that we see is that low income, less educated, and Black residents in Detroit are still much more likely to remain out of the workforce. And we're also finding that there are a lot of businesses that are closed. Around 71% of those who are not working say it's because their businesses are temporarily closed. But even among those who are able to go back to work, about 40% say that their hours have been reduced. So even as unemployment is dropping, there might be a lot of people who are earning less or not able to cover their costs, in part because of these hour reductions that we're seeing. And so I think we have to take the unemployment rate a little bit with a grain of salt, that more people might be back to work, but not necessarily at full capacity or full earnings. And that might explain in part why financial precarity remains so high in the city. We are seeing that a huge proportion of Detroiters say that they are in pretty dire economic straits. About 1 in 5 say they're struggling financially right now, and more than a third are telling us that they couldn't cover a $400 emergency expense if one were to arise today. And so thinking about some of the benefits that have lapsed, both the end of the $600 a week unemployment benefit that expired in Michigan on July 25th, I believe, as well as a lack of renewed stimulus payments and a lot of the moratoria that are lapsing now. There's a lot of people who are sitting at a point of extreme financial precarity. And unemployment benefits have been an important part of helping to keep Detroiters afloat. They're not necessarily the only piece. Around a quarter of Detroit residents say that they're receiving unemployment benefits, including about 3/4 of those who are newly unemployed due to the pandemic. So obviously that's going to have an impact if they no longer are able to receive a sizable unemployment check, and their unemployment, I think, will now max out closer to $400 a week. And then we also are seeing that there's a huge proportion of Detroiters who say that they have skipped bills in the past. 43% of residents said they've skipped or partially paid one or more bill in the last month. And those could be people who are unemployed, but they also could be just people who are underemployed, people who are retired. And so that suggests that there might also be sort of an accumulating level of debt among Detroiters that, with the lapse of moratoria, with the lack of an additional stimulus check, could really be having an impact in the coming months.
See, thank you very much. Just to put it in context, you talked about the 38% unemployment rate now. What was the city's unemployment rate before COVID? And you talked about the kind of things that Detroiters were not paying, utilities. I wonder if it was even more, are they making the choices between food and rent and bills? I mean, I don't know if you've measured that closely, but if you can talk about those choices people are now having to make.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I don't know that we know necessarily about the trade-offs between what people are spending their money on now compared to before the pandemic. Our estimate of the unemployment rate prior to the pandemic in the city was around 11%. And then, as I said, it reached a high, according to our estimates in May, around 48%. And so that's a pretty striking difference in terms of just how many people have lost their jobs. In terms of food instability and those who haven't paid different bills, what we find is that about 56% of Detroit residents say that they were unable to afford the food that they need, or think that they'll be unable to afford the food they need in the coming months. And that's especially true of families with children. And that we also see 27% of Detroiters with housing bills, so either who are paying rent or are paying a mortgage, say that they've skipped a payment, compared to about the same amount, 28% say that they haven't paid a utility bill. And so that's a pretty sizable proportion of people who might be in need of some financial assistance there, or might be facing evictions, shutoffs in the coming months. We have looked at eviction rates and shut-off rates in Detroit previously. I don't have those numbers in front of me, but I can tell you that they were not as high as what we fear we might be seeing soon.
Yeah, if I can just add a couple points. I think that to Lydia's last point, it's what we're not seeing is almost as notable as what we have been seeing in terms of financial precarity. And what I mean is that people have not been reporting huge levels of concerns about housing instability. I mean, it's an issue, but people have been protected somewhat by the moratoria on evictions and foreclosures. And the concern is that once those are lifted, we're going to see, on top of all the other problems that we're seeing in terms of reduced hours, more people laid off from jobs, a lot more concerns about housing instability, and probably also because of the lapse of the unemployment supplement, the benefit supplement, more economic precarity than we saw before. I just wanted to also add one last point, which was about spending patterns. We do ask questions about how people's spending patterns and savings patterns have changed during the pandemic. And both overall, are you spending more or less than you did before? And specifically, what kinds of things are you spending more or less on? And what we have seen from the beginning of the pandemic is that there's a mix. There's probably slightly more households who are spending less money during the pandemic, but there's a substantial share of households that are spending more money during the pandemic. And those tend to be disproportionately represented in lower income groups and also people of color. And the reasons that they give us for spending more are primarily due to increased costs of food and household supplies associated with having more mouths to feed, more people in the house, and more cleaning supplies and sanitation type supplies and masks during the pandemic, and also facing prices at the store that are higher than they would have seen before the pandemic, and being less able to do comparison shopping because they can't go to as many different stores as they used to. So those are just some more of the findings that speak to your question, Lewis.
I see, thank you. I don't know if you measure this, but I mean, obviously it means, as you pointed out, there's just less money being spent in the overall economy. Which means, I mean, it's just the ripple effect of all of this. Have you measured that in any way, or is there some way to gauge that?
Well, the flip side of what I was just saying is that there's less money being spent on entertainment, less money being spent on travel. Lydia might remember some of the other categories that we asked about. The implication is that households that spend a greater share of their income on food and household supplies are getting hit harder. Those who spend less of their paycheck on those kinds of things and spend maybe more of it on other things like entertainment and travel are actually spending less than they used to. And I think that reconciles the story that you're telling, which is that, you know, businesses are hurting because not as many people are spending money. And on the other hand, some very low income families are hurting because they're having to spend more on certain types of things. Lydia, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I was just going to add that though our surveys of households and not of businesses, and so we don't necessarily know the through line of how businesses are evaluating whether or not they should open or whether or not they have to close permanently. What we can say by looking at people who are unemployed and whether they're unemployed because where they work has closed temporarily or permanently, the majority are just temporarily closed, right? 71% of people who are out of work say it's because their employer is closed temporarily, but around 14% say that their business has closed permanently. And I think you're probably seeing a lot of businesses trying to make the calculation of, do I open and try to cover my costs, given that people are spending less at restaurants, going to fewer businesses, and really having to hold on to their money? Or do I try to persist, stay closed, just cover the carrying cost of rent, and just try to weather this? Or do I have to close permanently? And it really seems like we don't know yet exactly how many are going to close permanently, but the fact that so many are still telling us that their businesses, that they're not working because businesses are closed, is, I think, a pretty concerning sign.
I see. Okay. I thank you both very much for the conversation, and I look forward to the new survey.
Thank you.
So much for the time.
Yeah, we really appreciate talking to you and really appreciate the work that you do at Bridge Detroit. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes,
So-
Lydia, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So part of this debate about the $600 extra week in unemployment benefit is that some people don't want to go back to work because they're making more money sitting at home. And so I wonder if there's any way you've tried to measure that or gauge that.
Yes, I may have to defer to Lydia on some specifics, but I can give you the generalities. So we ask a lot of questions about this. We first of all ask people how serious the pandemic is, both for them personally and for their communities. And we also ask about their level of comfort in engaging in different types of public activities and also in returning to work. And from the beginning, but especially over time, we've seen an increased number of people who are concerned about all of the above. They take the pandemic very seriously and are very concerned about going back to work. And if they had their preference, would be working from home. Unfortunately, there's also an uneven distribution of people who are able and unable to work from home. And we've also noticed that people from lower income groups are more likely to be in frontline jobs and have to, if they are going to work, have to do their work outside of the home. So the overall picture that I'm trying to paint here is one that some people have to return to work outside the home. A lot of people are hesitant about re-engaging in economic life and in public life, and are practicing social distancing, which I think is the flip side of this. That's a very positive thing for the city of Detroit, and probably one of the reasons why the outbreaks that we saw at the beginning of the pandemic have subsided. Not to say that we still don't have problems, but that people are taking the pandemic quite seriously. Lydia, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so we asked on the previous survey, I don't believe it was on this most recent survey, about people's preferences for returning to their workplaces. And we found, like Jeff said, about half said that they would just rather keep working from home until they feel it's more safe. And obviously, that's a luxury that a lot of people don't have. So, that distinction is probably also contributing to some of the discrepancies or the disparities between who is employed, who isn't employed, who is at risk, who isn't at risk. But that's certainly an aspect of our findings that we think are interesting and contributing to this issue. And when we ask people, what would it take for you to go back to the office, or even to go back and resume sort of aspects of public life, like shopping at clothing stores, a lot of people say there's nothing. You would need, all of the above. You need testing, you need a vaccine, you need, as much PPE as can be provided before I feel comfortable. And, I think that that's a really sort of concerning signal for a lot of businesses, that there's just the level of discomfort is quite high.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks for letting us say that.
Sure. Okay, all right, that is it for me. Thank you very much. Good luck.
All right, good to talk to you as always. We really appreciate your interest in our work. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, thank you, Lydia.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.